Hey everyone, and welcome to FFM Music's The Soundtrack Podcast. My name is George Strezov, and today I'm pleased to have as my guest the extraordinary composer and orchestrator Robin Hoffmann. Robin, welcome to this podcast. I've been a huge fan of your music since, maybe for more than 10 years.
Hi George, nice to be on the podcast. I'm really honored to be part of this podcast and talk and nerd about music. Thanks so much for
that's
having
the
me.
main idea. Probably most of you who are listening to this podcast already know Robin's amazing daily film scoring bits. I know that you've written those hints and tips about film music and about orchestration for more than 10 years, I guess.
I think I started in 2009 and continued doing so until 2020, and then I transitioned over to Patreon.
Yeah, well, these are amazing. I mean, I've read so many of those, and some are really insightful, and some are actually very inspiring.
Great to hear. It's quite
music.
interesting. I've just recently rewritten a few of those. I read a few of those again, and it also shows a little bit my personal progression, because some of them I would rephrase differently nowadays. But it's quite interesting to see how I thought about like 10 years ago about these things.
Yeah, and 10 years ago it was also it wasn't so common to actually find quality educational material about orchestral music online.
Yeah, absolutely. I think back then there was just a few online resources that weren't really good, and I felt like, why is there not content that explains a little bit more in depth how the work of a film composer or a film orchestrator works and how these things happen? And I just started at one point just writing little blog posts on my website, and that caught attention. And then I thought maybe I'd just do like this daily snippet of small information that I throw out to just, of course, lure in some people to my website and of course also get a bit more known. So that was, of course, not completely without an idea behind this, but it worked really well, and people enjoyed it, and I got a lot of comments from people, and also there are lots of people who collected all the tips in a big PDF and just saved that on their computer. It was quite fun experience then.
Yeah, well, in case you haven't, you're listening to this and you haven't checked those out, be sure to check them. The daily film scoring bits, also now on Robin's Patreon. Really an insightful material about orchestration, composition process, and so forth. It's things that we are also going to be talking about today. So tell us, how did you're a classically trained musician. You've studied piano. You've also studied orchestration. But how did you find your love towards orchestral music?
I think I've grown up in a music family. My entire father's side are musicians, and my father was also a musician when I was a kid. And music was always present in my family. And I think at the age of 9 or 10, I discovered an old computer. It was quite modern back then, but now it's really old. It was like a Commodore C64.
Yeah.
And there was this. It had a clunky MIDI interface that you could plug into it, and you could just record what you did on the keyboard and create certain patterns that you can record in several stacks. And I started just improvising with that. And I think it was around 11 or 10 when I first saw Jurassic Park.
Okay, John Williams.
That was the trigger for me. It was actually particularly the scene where the helicopter approaches the island, this island fanfare. That one just basically blew me away. And at that time, I just loved the music, and I didn't know who John Williams was. And then a little later out, I figured out that John Williams, the composer, also wrote the score for Home Alone, which was also like a staple in my childhood, because it was the Christmas movie back in the day, and I loved the music there as well. And then I figured out he also did Hook. So basically, it always came back to this one man who obviously wrote the music for all the movies that I loved and all the scores that I loved. And back in the day when I was like 12 or 13, I was naive enough to just say, okay, let me do orchestral music because it can't be so tricky, can it? And obviously it was very, very tricky, and I failed miserably, but that's just part of the learning experience.
That's right.
And from there it just went on. I was just a nerdy kid who just gathered all the books on orchestration and all the score sheets that I could get my hands on back then, which was really tricky to actually find film score sheets. And I just went from there, and I actually decided I wanted to do film music, and my plan originally was to just study film sound and branch off into film scoring at that time. And at one point in this process, after school, between after finishing my A-levels and going to university or applying for university, I figured out that this whole sound thing is not my thing, because they required me to draw microphone schemes and stuff like that, which is really not what I really wanted to do. And I decided, okay, let me just basically take a year, prepare for the tests for the composition course on my music university, and just try to go with it. And it was basically just the decision to say, okay, I want to do this properly, and I don't want to be in my 40s and just look back and think about what would have happened if I actually did it. So I decided, okay, let me just go all in and hope that it works out somehow.
And are you? I guess things nowadays are a bit different, but back then, do you think that the education that you received was up to a good level?
I actually I didn't really study film composition. I actually studied composition from the musical standpoint, and at the university that I was, there were actually 2 composition courses, which was quite rare at the time. I think it's still quite rare. One was the contemporary composition, which we have in most universities nowadays, and there was the other branch, which was back at that time, I think it's still called that, composition, jazz, rock, pop. And this is where I went in, because I knew from the beginning that I don't want to have all these contemporary stuff. I don't really care about all these sound experiments and all these at that time weird sounding music of contemporary classical music. But I wanted to learn how to write proper melodies. I wanted to learn how to write proper arrangements, how to get to that sound that I love so much. And my professor back then was a very cool guy. He was the professor of the jazz department, but his own upbringing was from a classical world. So he studied classical composition, and he had an extreme broadband knowledge, and that helps a lot, or that helped me a lot during that time, because every Thursday I went home to him, and he had like this huge shelf full of score sheets. And every week we went, and it was score sheets from Palestrina to Stockhausen, and every week we went there, and he took one out, and we went to the piano, and he said, "Hey, Robin, look at this. He did it this way, and look at this. He arranged it this way, and this voicing works like this." And this was invaluable. It was because, of course, when you're a film composer, you need to draw sources from everything, and you need to have a quick access to all the devices that float around in the music world. And this really helped a lot. And I think all the film scoring stuff, I think I just gathered on the way, because it's still one thing that I still firmly believe nowadays. Also with composition, you learn it best if you do it. I mean, people can point you into certain directions, and they can show you certain concepts, but the creative part of applying that and figuring out how it actually works in your own workflow is just something that you need to figure out on your own. And the same applied with the film stuff. When I was at uni, I just went through the internet and just wrote to student filmmakers or amateur filmmakers who were just shooting a movie in their backyard and said, hey, do you need some music? I can do it. And so I worked my way up there. And of course, I also gathered the experience of what can be done with film music and how to apply it.
Yeah, I think that this is education is really absolutely necessary, in my opinion, for orchestration and composition. I was because here in Bulgaria, in my country, I really wanted to study film music, but there wasn't anything like this. So the obviously you maybe, I think nowadays you can study something like that, but when I was studying, there wasn't such a degree at all. But as you said, going through all those examples from the Renaissance era to modern music and late Romanticism, that's really invaluable. And so, speaking of this, obviously, you've gone through all those examples. You've written and orchestrated music in different areas, and often, especially nowadays, with people like Hans Zimmer, you would get the sentence that a film score needs its own unique voice. So this is what's contemporary and modern right now, I think. Are you looking for something new and unique in terms of combination and textures when you're orchestrating?
When I'm specifically orchestrating?
Yeah, specifically orchestrating.
I think when I'm orchestrating, of course, it depends whether I'm orchestrating for myself or orchestrating for another composer. When I'm orchestrating for myself, I try to find sounds and combinations that are. I mean, it would be weird to just claim that I discover a combination of sounds that hasn't been done before. I mean, everything has been done in regular standard orchestration practice, but I always try to find sounds that I it's not necessarily that I feel like I want to reinvent the wheel, but more often I try to find a sound that works emotionally with a movie, or that just has a certain quality that puts a kind of certain stamp on the sound of the music. But personally, I always feel that I personally cannot, when I work on my own music, I cannot separate the composition process from the orchestration process. This is, for me, this is one thing that needs to be done together, because if I'm writing for violin, I'm also writing the music for violin. When I know that it's going to be a violin, I will write this different than if it later turns out to be a flute. So I have a certain color in mind, and I have a certain instrument in mind, and that kind of informs how I write for this instrument. And so personally, when I try to find the voice, however you want to call it, for a movie, I try to find ways from the orchestrational side, how to get it into a certain way, but also rather from the conceptual side. For example, I've done a movie a few years back where I combined a large string orchestra with a string quartet. And that was the idea behind this, to just have this scope between. Basically, we also recorded the string quartet in a very small space to get this really intimate sound. And the idea was to have like this broadband possibility to go from the super intimate, small, detailed quartet sound to the CinemaScope large string section sound, and anything in between. And this was like a conceptual approach, and also how I, for example, for that score, how I wrote for this quartet to use a more contemporary playing techniques, have them play with just very little vibrato, or have them play sul ponticello, like all these textural stuff that you get out of solo strings, and use that as a conceptual idea. And at the same time, of course, I don't just reduce the conceptual idea to just these decisions, but I also try to find certain harmonies, certain harmonic worlds, certain chord combinations, or certain registers that I try to specifically focus on in this in this music. I feel that just reducing it to let me find a weird sound that I can use as the signature for the score is just not enough. Or personally for me, it doesn't just cut it to just find a sound that sounds special and then just do everything as you would always do it. But I feel that it's a more holistic approach to writing music, to find a certain language from the harmonic perspective, to find a certain language from the melodic perspective, and of course also find a certain language from the textual perspective. But this all goes into one big idea of how the score or how the music should be.
And since you mentioned the way that you cannot separate composition from orchestration in your personal experience, what is the process? How do you write music? Do you orchestrate and compose directly, or do you first do some sort of a piano reduction which you later on orchestrate, obviously keeping in mind that this line is, as you said, for example, violin?
Yeah, so basically what I do a lot, or what I basically exclusively do, is I work straight into score sheet. I never go the way through DAW into score sheet. I work straight into score sheet, and if I need a demo, I'll export from the notation software and then do a mock-up. So basically, I cannot work in the just compose in a DAW. It doesn't work for me for several reasons that are just personal. And when I start writing, I usually start writing right into a big score sheet. So I have like all the instruments there, and I start to usually sketch out at the first phase. So for example, I will just sketch a brass chord in the horns and then just make a mental note to myself that later out I'm gonna explode this to the entire brass section. But for the sake of just figuring out what I want to do with the music, I just write it there, and then I sometimes just do a little sketch of a figure, like a very small detailed figure, where I just write out the first few beats and then just make a note for myself, okay, extend this for the next 5 bars, but I don't want to deal with this right now. I'm just gonna go past these 5 bars now and do the music there. And so this is basically, I do this once until I hit the end of the piece, and then I start at the beginning again and do all the detail work, like do all the detail orchestration. But on my way there, I of course know already, okay, this line is going to be in the flutes. This line is going to be like a trumpet fanfare or something like this. So I sketch this into this stuff already that's gonna end up with. But sometimes I've come to, or I have probably gathered enough experience to know that when I sketch something, how far I can take it when I do it in the detail work. So I don't need to, at the very first moment, I don't need to write out everything to just figure out, okay, does that work or does it not work? I kind of can abstract at the moment when I sketch already, okay, this is now total rubbish, but I know if I just spend 10 more minutes on this, I will expand this to something that really works in this context. So let me just skip that and go to the next part. And so it's just this matter of experience to just know, okay, I'm going to fix this later. Let me just get on with the piece now and then go back to the beginning and do the detail work.
I myself, when I'm it depends on whether I'm writing something that's just like a concert piece, for example, or I'm writing directly in the score sheet. But I always start with like a piano, making some sort of a piano reduction, just to keep the form, the structure of the whole thing. Yeah. But how do you handle, for example, directors?
It really depends on some of the directors. I've written a score for a movie that's going to come out at the end of the year with a brother duo who were the directors, and they basically are super into film music. They love film scoring, and they have they know how music works, and they always plan the music into their movie, which also many directors just don't do. They just expect the music to just be put on top after it's done, but they basically they see the music as a main character of the movie. and they are so into film music that I can just basically send Dorico output demos to them, and they can abstract how it's going to sound with real orchestra in the end. So they basically just they know that the demos that I sent them are subpar and that they're just not representing what it's going to be in the end, but they trust me enough, and they also can abstract enough to know, okay, this is going to sound better with the orchestra. And then there are the directors who just want a super polished demo right from the beginning. So in this case, depending on what budget and what time frame I have, I either outsource the mock-upping to someone, or I do it myself. That is basically the way how I work. Basically, it's for me always working in the score sheet, and whatever then needs to be done, if the time permits, I do it myself. If it doesn't, then I'll find someone who helps me and just do mock-ups so I can sell the idea to the director. It's basically the other way around than many composers do it nowadays, that they just do the demo and do it in a DAW and then they outsource the orchestration. But for me, it's more or less the other way around.
Yeah, but both options, I guess, have their ups and downs. But if you're working at the DAW with the samples, suddenly you're limiting yourself to what the samples are capable of. Yeah, so
this is also. I'm also doing orchestrations for a lot of composers, and very often I just see how they wrote for samples instead of how they wrote for orchestra. Yes. It's basically, you see the music is written for samples, and I'm just trying to, when I orchestrate that, I'm just trying to replicate how the samples sounded to eventually record this with real orchestra, which is a weird way to approach it, but this is how it very often works. And only very rarely you get composers who see that they're hitting a limit with the samples, and who see that their samples do not represent how it's going to be in the end, and they just go beyond what is possible. But then, of course, you also need to sell it to the director. And basically, if you're doing like a horror score with a lot of contemporary effects and glissandi and stuff like that, it's very tricky to mock up that in any useful way. And many composers then just fall back to pre-recorded effects samples that they just throw on top of it in order to just create this horror effect that I just then, as a composer, take down and replicate as an orchestrator. Then I take down, replicate it with the real orchestra, and we're just basically in this endless loop of replicating samples and doing copies of the same copy again.
I'm actually in. Right now, I'm doing like this psychological horror film, a weird film, but. I'm really struggling to get things done, like aleatoric stuff, and because I already have some sort of an idea in my mind what it should sound like, and I cannot sell it to the director without using pre-recorded phrases, and then they get used to it, and
and they want to have it exactly like this in the final recording. And I mean, it's also sometimes very tricky to just replicate these aleatoric effects in the context of a piece, because very often they are recorded isolated. For example, you have like this string glissando upwards, which with a sample is the entire string section, but then you have it in a piece where under this sample there's also the string section playing whatever staccato notes, and I only have like the first violins left to do this glissando, and it's not having this full body that the original sample had, and then we need to do an overdub, and we need to stop, and then sometimes time doesn't permit, and we don't have the budget to just do that many overdubs, and it's always like these decisions that need to be made.
So, not from a composer's point of view, I want to speak to you also about from the orchestration's point of view. What are the challenges during a recording session? I know in our experience here, sometimes, actually quite often, which for me it's a bit weird, but quite often orchestrators are not present during the recording session. Are you listening to the recording sessions of music that's written by other people and you have orchestrated?
Yes, quite often I'm actually also hired to run the session as an orchestrator.
Yes.
That is what quite a lot of people ask me to do, because they come to me and say, hey Robin, I have the budget for an orchestra, but I'm not that experienced, and I need somebody to just kind of take me by the hand and guide me through the process. And sometimes I'm not present, but this only happens when I know that the composer or whoever runs a session actually knows what they're doing. But most of the time, I'm either listening in through remote recording, or I'm going there. I mean, Prague is just around the corner from Berlin, so it's pretty, and all the other locations are pretty close by as well. So then I usually go there, and it's always better to be present there also compared to just listening in on a remote stream, because sometimes just if you can see what's happening in the room and you can see, okay, they're fixing already this, what I wanted to address just a second ago. You see this already. Okay, they are working on this. I don't need to say that again.
So what are the biggest challenges that the orchestrator should think about?
You mean in the session itself, or
during the session?
During the session. I think it's most of the time we're just struggling with time. It's just get as much record as possible in as little time as possible, and you just I mean, the more you do it, the more you develop strategies to accelerate this, and you also get a certain routine in writing things in a certain way, because you know, okay, the room works like this and the musicians work like that, and the more you do this in a specific place, you know what's going to be there, or what to expect, and what challenges there are. And but I think from the most obvious problems that we have is timing and intonation. That is the things that you battle with all the time. So either someone is off tune or something is not together, especially when you're recording modern Hollywood stuff with all these 16s in the strings. It's just very often, no matter how often you try this, sometimes it just floats apart and then it comes back together. So then you need to address these things. And I think one of the personal challenges that I always see is that there are so many variables in an orchestra, and sometimes it's just weird how sometimes things slip by that you just listen to later on in the recording. So why didn't I hear that? Because you're just focused on so many things, and you're at this one point you're focusing on intonation, but there might be a noise in the room at the same time that you just don't hear. And I hope, or most of the time I hope, or I try to have as many people that I trust in the room, whom I assign certain roles to, or who are automatically assigned certain roles. So I expect a good recording engineer to just listen for noises, for anything that from a sound side, so that I can focus on the musical interpretation when I'm running a session, because there's no way that you can listen to everything at the same time. You just need certain people that you trust with good ears in the room to just help you on capturing all the things that need to be addressed. And I think one other challenge that I learned also over the time is that it's a very simple thing to say that, but musicians know when they did something wrong most of the time, and it's not necessary very often to tell them, look, there was a wrong note there, or you played this entrance badly. They know this. So you don't need to address this specifically, and it also kills the mood if you just single out someone. And so it's a kind of psychological game in a certain way, because you need to keep the mood up, but you also want to keep them focused and want to give them the feeling that somebody is actually caring for what they're doing, and also expecting them to do their best job. But at the same time, you don't want to kill the mood or pick on certain people specifically all the time, or just make inappropriate comments that someone might be heard about. So, for example, if a certain, I had this in a session last year sometime, where there was just one player in the woodwind section who continuously struggled to play a very simple melody, and not from the technical standpoint, but she just didn't figure out the rhythm of this particular line. And I did a second take, and I could, of course, gone on and say, okay, let's do so many takes until you finally got it. But I figured out that it wasn't worth the hassle and the psychological pressure that I put on her already, because she knew she didn't get this right. So I just said, okay, let's start at this passage from there to there. So I just cut her out, and in this case I didn't need to replicate by samples, but in some cases I would then just say, okay, let's see if we can figure this out with samples. But it just didn't make a lot of sense to just keep on picking on her and kind of pointing the finger at her and, look, you can't play this, let's do one more take and then you can play it again. And to just capture, or to just read the mood of the room, and to just read how the musicians feel and where the struggles are. I think this is something that comes with experience, and it takes a lot of time to just get right of how much you say them, how much do you tell them over the microphone, how much do you interfere with what they're doing, how much do you let them do their self. And of course, obviously, you need to have a score sheet that leaves as little doubt as possible. So little doubt of how is this meant. And it's just very... I try to. This is, of course, coming from my perspective of being an orchestrator most of the time, or many times. I try to deliver score material and part material that is as good as possible as I can do it, and I write certain things in that you probably wouldn't write in if it was like a piece of music where you have rehearsal time and try to try time to figure things out. But with sight reading sessions, I sometimes write in like verbal remarks, like bring out, or like how I want this to feel, like very mysteriously, or very aggressively, or when you have like brass stabs, like low brass stabs, I just write in stab because I want them to know exactly from the beginning that this should be a really sharp attack, very short note, not like a bard, but really a bap, really accented, and all these little things that I figured out on the way, how to get players to the point where I want them without much doubt and much room for what could he have meant. I think this is just something that you collect over time.
Have you found any I wouldn't say shortcuts, but ways of notating that can be applied to like a specific orchestra? I'll give you an example because it's a weird question. For example, I find out that string players, if you have like two bars and two whole notes, and you want to separate them, so you normally put like a comma, breath mark, above, and often they don't perform it. I found. So I found out that, for example, putting like a 16th note pulse at the end of the bar makes it absolutely clear, so it doesn't need to be communicated, or hey, you missed that, and they would be, okay. So have you found out stuff like this that helps out the process through
absolutely
experience?
Like these things that I think one of the things that I'm really picky with and that I really try to get right is ending of notes, because this is something that in the classical world, attacks are clear, but where do we end the note is something that is somewhere in between. And I like to, for example, this is coming actually from the classical tradition, that you don't have like just a whole note and then a bar line and then a rest. What you either do is you tie over into an eighth note, or you end an eighth note early, so that they know, okay, I'm ending on beat 4 or on beat 1 exactly. And I try to be very precise with these things. And I know that this is really depending on what kind of orchestras you have, because when you record with real seasoned session orchestras, you can just write a whole note and they will hold the note until the end of the bar line, because they are so used to this. Like if you record in Los Angeles or London, they know exactly, okay, if there's a whole note, I'm gonna end it on the bar line. But if you're recording with more classical trained musicians, I tend to be a little bit more precise with where do we end the notes, and even then you don't really get all the endings right, and then you sometimes need to interfere if necessary. But these things, I think it's very much a difference between, do you write for musicians who are mostly concert musicians and who play mostly concert literature, or do you write for musicians who are more session musicians? And depending on that, I differ a little bit in the way how I write it, in things that I just mentioned, or how much I write in. For example, when I know that an orchestra, I mean, it's for musicians, it requires a certain stylistic understanding to get this film music sound right. This is something that I've also learned, because if you put a score in front of an orchestra that knows how to play film music, it will sound distinctively different than if you just put it in the same at an orchestra who's just a concert orchestra and doesn't have this experience of playing film music. And depending on where I go, I will write differently. For example, for a classical orchestra, I might write more extreme dynamics to get to this film sound. Because if I just, especially with brass, where they, like classical orchestras, especially here in Central Europe, a fortissimo for brass always implies a cultivated, controlled sound. It's always like you don't go beyond this point where it starts to kind of distort, which we sometimes need in film music. We sometimes need this to have this brassy, like in your face, extreme fortissimos, which you very rarely get out of classical concert players, and you need to find ways to get them to do this. And I tend to write more extreme dynamics for them, and even then, I sometimes need to maybe write even brassy or cuivre on the brass, so that they actually know, okay, give it all you have. We need this here. And what I've also learned is that the room makes a strong influence on how players play, because if they are playing in a small room, especially the brass will hold back with strong dynamics, because they know if they just give it all, they will overpower the entire room, especially when you're recording tutti in it, and there are also strings in there. You get a lot of players, or it's also just very uncomfortable if an entire brass section is playing fortissimo in a small room, because it's just it's just extremely loud, and everybody will just be annoyed by that. So they they automatically will hold back. But of course, at one point you need this kind of extreme dynamic, and so depending on room, orchestra, location, there's always a little bit of difference how I notate certain things.
I found out I did a very big in terms of content video game soundtrack, and I recorded the brass in Prague, and I found out that they play wonderfully. I mean, very in tune.
Where did you record in Prague? Smečky?
Smečky. Okay. Yeah, so that's a small room.
Yeah, that's small, indeed.
Yeah, but I found out that they play very much in tune. They're very the group that I had, they were very compact in terms of where they end the note, when they start, intonation obviously as well. But the sound was it was kind of very very classical. It wasn't the sound that you're used to listening to, say, John Williams, for example, or James Horner, or the LA or London sound. Yeah. So maybe I should have notated it a bit differently in terms of dynamics.
It's quite interesting. I've recorded quite a lot in Prague, and I know most of the recording locations in Prague, and it's quite interesting if you place the same musicians in a different room, how different they will play. Like I had a few years ago, I had a session at Rudolfinum, which is like the complete opposite of the Smečky room. It's a super large concert hall with a extremely long reverb, so you don't want to record anything that is super tight rhythmically there. It's more suited for like long notes and stuff like that. And I had the same players that I usually have in Smečky, or a lot of the same players that I usually have in Smečky, and they just play differently there, because the brass know, okay, if I can play fortissimo and it's not going to kill the room, it will bloom in the room, and it's just they know the space around them, and they react on the space around them. So it's just very specific on where you record and where you play.
And you have orchestrated and also written music for video games, and you have worked with Dynamedian.
Yes.
So how hard is it to work in such a collective of so many talented people? How many people are there normally on a Dynamedian game?
Dynamedian, I've actually only orchestrated. I've never written any music for Dynamedian. So I know that they have a large team of composers there, and I think I have written something once for them, which was for a movie actually, not for a game. And I think it was a team of 5 composers, and I think I just did 1 or 2 cues there. It's in this case, it's just a matter of organization. There's going to be a lead composer who's writing all the musical material, and then it's being distributed in whatever form to all the composers, so that everybody knows, okay, that is a musical material that we're dealing with. And then the lead composer maybe gives a few guidelines where it's going to head stylistically, and then you just go for it. But as I'm normally just orchestrating for Dynamedian, it's a smooth sailing job for me, because basically I'm just trying to translate what the demos sound like into the real orchestral world.
And you did Anno, right?
I worked on two Anno parts as an orchestrator.
Oh, were they recorded? I mean, it's in Germany, right? Or not?
I think Anno 14.4 was recorded in Germany, and I think with the in Halle, Staatskapelle Halle, I think it was, or is it called Staatskapelle Halle? I'm not quite sure, but it's a relatively small city here in the central Germany, and with Anno 2207, I don't even know. I think it might have been Budapest.
1404. That's. It was a great game, but also a great soundtrack.
Yeah,
really nice
really
recording.
Like this.
Yeah, and you have also a really great experience at combining band with an orchestra. So how do you do that? How do you do this? I mean, because band, especially with guitars and everything, they're putting so much into the frequency spectrum that you need to weave around. And are you present during the rehearsals, for example, if they're local bands?
Yeah, I mean, I have to distinguish between 2 ways here. What I'm doing a lot is writing string arrangements for pop recordings. So basically where the orchestra is recorded separately from the band, which gives you, of course, way more possibilities in the mixing and also in the arrangement. But what I did a lot, and I'll still do a lot, is doing arrangements for bands who have the chance to play a show with an orchestra. And very often this is kind of these crossover concerts that are very popular currently, or not that much anymore, but until COVID they were very popular. And I just get the material from them and or their music, and then I'm sometimes hired to do rearrangements of this for the orchestra, or they just hire me to basically just layer an orchestra on top of it. But I prefer to just go a little bit more extreme with this and just maybe reharmonize certain things and then rework passages that are then entirely orchestral. But of course, having a band on stage and an orchestra is always a struggle, no matter what you do. I think it's not so much the guitar. You can always handle a guitar, but as soon as you have a drum kit on stage, it's very, very challenging. And I approach this in the way that it feels almost like I'm orchestrating with a big adding pen, because I'm just... If there's a line that I want to make sure that comes out, I'm not doubling it just once, but I'm doubling it in half of the orchestra. So it's just, especially in loud songs that are very high energetic, you just reduce the material and try to run as well as you can with the material that you have, and just place it in the orchestra. And it's sometimes, looking at the orchestral score sheets, they are looking terrible, because you just have like half of the orchestra just mounted on one line, because this is only how it works, or you don't have any double basses, or you don't have any instruments in the low register because you know, okay, the band's gonna fill that up anyway. And you just have the violins and all the strings in super high registers and octaves trying to get this line across. Yes. But these are, of course, strategies that you also develop with experience, where you just figure out, okay, I mean, I've the first few gigs that I did in this kind of regard, I just figured out, okay, no matter what I write in the middle register, it's not going to be audible anyway.
Yes.
So it's just, you go all through this process of learning and then just figure out, okay, this is, I don't need to do this here because it's not going to be audible anyway. So let me use these instruments in a more useful way and double the melody once again.
Yeah. And you have, well, speaking of concert music, you have a violin concerto.
Yes.
Which is amazing. And I'm not sure if you remember, but you were really kind enough to send me a score.
Yeah, I remember.
Of it. And I was, I really did a lot of studying and listening to it, even though at certain points you can't hear much of the orchestra, unfortunately, on the recording.
Yeah.
But how do you approach this? I mean, how do you approach, especially the solo part?
Yeah,
the violin part.
I mean, this was, to put this in context, this was 13 years ago, so it has been quite a while since then. Yeah. And I was in my 20s back then, and in my early 20s actually, and I just got, for obscure reasons, I got the chance to write this violin concerto. And of course, at that time, I was also not that, how should I put it? Not that experienced to just go about this and say, yeah, I'm going to do this no matter what. I was really scared of this gig, but I had two options: either not do it, or or on the other side record with the LSO at Abbey Road. So
yeah,
the choice was not that complicated. It was basically also at that time I didn't know a lot of solo violin literature. So what I basically did is I listened for months to every violin concerto that I could find online, and then just figure out if I can find the score sheet somewhere and just study that. And the solo parts in that concerto were written in close collaboration with the soloist. So I sent some ideas to her, and she said, okay, this is very tricky, let me just rewrite these 3 notes, or can you do this a little differently, because that is problematic here, I can't play this and that. So it was a challenge to, of course, to get this all done, but yeah, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I didn't want to miss this, and I didn't want to mess this up. So I did everything that I had in myself to just get this to a point where I would say, okay, this is, I'm reasonably proud with this, and I think it's gonna work somehow. Yeah, this was the approach there.
And I suppose you enjoyed the session with the LSO for sure.
To be honest, I hardly remember anything. It was just such a blur because I was so super excited, and I just walking through the door of Abbey Road 1, standing in the same position where John Williams conducted Star Wars and whatnot, and just seeing when you walk through Abbey Road, you have like all these hallways where there are posters of all the movies that were scored there and all the big stars that recorded there, and it was just too much for 25 or 26-year-old me.
Yeah,
just going through there, and I remember a few things, but of course it was super exciting, and it was I was just blown away. I mean, back at that time, I had some experience with real orchestra in Eastern Europe, and I know that the LSO is a different level, but I was not prepared for what they would put in front of me there, because it's just like from the first read-through take, you could basically just say, okay, yeah, that's gonna go on the CD, because it's just I mean, obviously we did a few more takes, but just the first take was brilliant. And I remember very vividly when I walked into the studio and the musicians were in there warming up, and then there was this one horn player who was just warming up, and he was as loud and present as 4 horns in another orchestra. So he was just like this. It's just like already the warm up was a kind of different experience than any horn players that I experienced up to this time. It's just like, this was just another world for me, and it was just like mind-blowing. And also at that time, because I had a lot of experience with recording orchestras in Prague at that time, and being kind of used to this small orchestral sound, I was just shocked at how much of brass Abbey Road can actually absorb. I mean, I've written really loud brass passages there, and still in the recording, the strings dominate, because of course also the string players of the LSO have this resonant, super intense sound. So when they play fortissimo, they really shine and they really sparkle. And it was just, for me, it was a very big learning experience to just figure out that these balances in Abbey Road are different than all the balances that I experienced that far, because they just, of course, the room makes a lot of difference, but also the quality of the musicians, and having that many world-class musicians in this orchestra, which all on the, I mean, when
also instruments,
of course, but also when I know this, I experience this a lot when you record with not so great orchestras, especially the string sections. If you have like 12 first violins, the first two desks are very into this, and then you can see that the further into the back of the desks, you see there's someone then playing much softer, and at the last desk they're just marking. So just having 12 first violins all playing their hearts out, of course, makes a huge difference than what I was used to. And this was just, of course, an insane experience to just be there and experience that.
Did you have any input afterwards from the musicians?
I actually, the quite interesting thing is we had the lunch break during the recording, and I ended up on the table of the violin players of the orchestra, and it was a really nice chat. They were super kind, super encouraging. Also, they all said they love the music, and it's great playing, and it's a lot of fun. And it was a huge table, and there was like 6-7 violin players or string players sitting there, and they just integrated me as if I was a group of them. They were I was just sitting there, and we were chatting, and it was just like a very pleasant, very comfortable situation, not at all snobby or what you would expect sometimes in Central Europe, where film music sounding stuff is being looked down upon in a certain degree. That often, they often feel like they are better than playing this kind of entertaining music, or however you want to call it. And in London, they were super open, super friendly, super encouraging. It was an amazing experience.
So Robin, I would love to play some of your music here. So do you have any ideas what we can play on the podcast?
Let me listen to a piece that I wrote a few years ago, which is called "Gazing at the Night Sky," which interestingly, it just started out as a piece that I just wrote in order to try out a few new samples that I had, and I just wanted to use or to write a piece that I could use to trim my template and to just do balancing there. And I wrote this kind of science fiction-y, kind of 80s-ish piece that kind of has this outer-worldly classical adventure score feeling. And I had this theme that I used there for quite a few years, just laying on the in some of the drawers, because I pitched this theme to a movie, and the director didn't like it for this particular movie. He loved the theme, but it didn't fit for the movie, so I just put it into my drawer and pulled it out again and wrote this piece. And eventually I get the chance to fill up the end of recording sessions with music of my own, because there's just time left, and why send the musicians home if you can record something else? So I always have like a few pieces that I can just pull out and say, okay, we have enough time, let's do this one. And in this case, I recorded this with Dynamedion at Frankfurt Oder, which is the other orchestra that Dynamedion uses quite often. And this piece ended up there, and it's actually I still quite like it to this day, because it has this kind of 80s classical adventure score feeling that I personally also enjoy a lot. And it was a lot of fun writing this, and it was actually quite stressful to get this recorded because we only had like 30 minutes left, and the piece is, I think, 3:30 or something like that. So it was quite a struggle to get this all in, but we managed, and I'm quite happy with the result. So yeah, let's have a listen to that one.
All right, let's listen to Gazing at the Night Sky. And so this was Gazing at the Night Sky by Robin Hoffmann. So Robin, since we're getting to the end of the podcast, we have generally we have like 3 blitz questions at the end. And I would like to ask you each of those questions because I think they're very interesting. So first of all, what would your dream project be?
Good question. I think it would probably be a feature film that allows me to write music that we don't have that much anymore in Hollywood these days, but something like a full symphonic score that would just allow me to go into this, into this world of the good classical orchestral scores that we had in the 80s and 90s. I really love that. And to be honest, I got the chance to write something like this in one of the last projects that I did, and it's not yet out, but it's gonna come out by the end of the year. But this was very close to how I envision my ideal project to be.
Ideal. Awesome. And what are your obviously we've already talked about this at the beginning, but still, what are your 3 most favorite soundtracks, either for games or films?
In order to not just put John Williams up there, let's maybe try to find something else. I think one composer that I really like and whom I really adore, but I feel that he's very underappreciated, is Bruce Broughton. Who has written amazing scores, and I think that Silverado is probably the all-time best Western score I've ever heard, because this theme is just such a killer theme, and the way how he wrote this is an insane score. I really, really love that. Obviously, we mentioned John Williams. You can practically put anything by him on this list. And I think one more that I really like would probably be Sleepy Hollow from Danny Elfman, which is just this. I mean, Danny Elfman being as crazy as he is and writing as crazy music as he does, and I think Sleepy Hollow is like the pinnacle of both these worlds colliding. It's just an insanely captivating horror score with all the things that I love personally about Danny Elfman.
Yeah, Danny Elfman is. Have you listened to his masterclass?
I think I have, but it has been a while ago.
But one of the most interesting things about it was that he spoke a lot about. This just left a huge impact on me. He spoke about handling rejection.
Oh, okay.
And because it's also but that's another topic. So anyway, what would you, the last question, and I think the most important one is, what would your advice for a younger version of yourself be? So nowadays, what would you advise young Robin?
That's a good question. I think I would probably tell him to not question the path that he has chosen, because back then I remember that I was quite unsure about if I can make a living from writing orchestral music, if I can sustain my life from this, and if I can be also artistically fulfilled or feel artistically fulfilled, because that is something that I, to be honest, still struggle today, because of course there are a lot of projects where I just feel that they are just money gigs in a certain way, where I don't really feel like, okay, this is just artistically pleasing. But I would just tell the younger version of myself to just not doubt himself that much and just keep doing what he enjoys and just keep growing. I mean, I still feel that I haven't learned even the half of it. And this is something that fascinates me massively about music, that no matter how many years you're at it, whenever you're working on this, there's a new challenge and there's something new that you experience, or there's something new that you learn, and there's a new angle of this whole thing that you haven't figured out before and that you just realize suddenly. So this is something that, I would just tell him, don't question the path that you've chosen. Just go for it and go all in, and you'll eventually get to the point that you're enjoying.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
it was a real pleasure.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. All right, cheers.
Cheers.